STUCKness. That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Jon. I'm a full stack Agile coach with Aptera in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I describe myself as a full stack Agile coach because not only do I, when I join teams, I'm helping through things with communication, with process, with agility in general, on the quote-unquote soft side of things. But I've also been a developer since about the turn of the century. And some days I feel like I just might have the hang of it. So I'm also like helping out with extreme programming practices like TDD and pair programming and continuous delivery and all those wonderful buzzwords. Most of the time it's pretty great. We're pretty far into this Agile thing. We kind of get it. We do stuff 2 weeks at a time, and we deliver functionality, and we should have automated tests, and we should be doing this, and we should be doing that. But every now and then there's like this block on the team's thinking, or maybe the stakeholders thinking, the management or somebody gets held up, and it just confounds the whole process. And it becomes, in those little pockets, it becomes this uphill battle of fighting against the way we've been raised and trained to think about work and how we relate to that. And I've been just kind of as an Agile developer working with that for many years, and I've come across lots of ideas and theories that kind of work to untie what the Industrial Revolution did to our minds. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I read this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Has anybody read this? Excellent. All right. So this has nothing to do with software. This was written a couple of years before I was born, in 1974. And it's this kind of mid-century classic Eastern meets Western thought, father-son motorcycle story philosophy book. One of those. It's about a father and son who are driving a motorcycle kind of on a trek across America. And there's lots of just beautiful visuals and lots of gritty description of the things that they're doing. They're like stopping off and writing letters back home in diners and eating beans out of cans while camping. They're not like doing the it's not like a Jellystone Park kind of camping. They're like really in the dirt. And there's like this unveiling of something that's happened in their relationship as father and son, and it's kind of unrolling itself very slowly. And this would be kind of a really fine story on its own, a good novel. But on top of that, the author, Robert Pirsig, interleaves between the narrative of the motorcycle trip these philosophical deep dives he calls STUCKness, where he's not being narrative, he's just directly philosophizing, which is for a vulgar word for it, for what he's doing, because he does it so eloquently. And so we've got this contrast of narrative and non-narrative, and we've got a contrast of even just right there in the title, all these ideas that don't normally go together. And there's also this theme he's exploring throughout of people who embrace technology and people who avoid it, like, hold it kind of like a stinking fish, because they just, you have to have like a smartphone to get along in modern life, right? But grandma really doesn't know how to change the settings. Like those kind of people versus the kind of people who customize everything and really get into the nerd stuff. And that's kind of a theme throughout. But like I said, the title holds right there this juxtaposition of 3 different ideas that you wouldn't normally probably put together. There's motorcycle maintenance, that's kind of self-evident, right? You're working on your bike. Does anybody do that? Anybody have a motorcycle? Okay. Me neither, most of you. So a lot of this is pretty theoretical to me. But in any case, working on your bike, that's motorcycle maintenance, all right? And art, probably nobody in the room agrees on what art means, but you at least have a good idea of what it means to you. You know it when you see it, maybe. What about that other word? What about Zen? What does this mean? Maybe an inadvisable move, I did an image search for Zen. And of course, none of these things that showed up are Zen. Zen is not a dairy-free chocolate pudding that you can get at Whole Foods, despite what it says there. Not Zen. There's some Zen in this picture, but then some jerk came along and stacked rocks in a very anal retentive way right in front of it, and just ruined the whole thing. Definitely not Zen, clearly the work of a Jedi. And not a strict rule, but like if it involves yoga pants, not Zen. If you show up on a shitty porch with your duffel bag packed and your burial money ready to lay your life down for Project Mayhem, and Tyler Durden comes out and says, "You're too fat, you're too old, fuck off." That's closer. That's closer to Zen. So we're getting there, but it's really difficult. I can't just spell it out. There's no like elevator pitch for Zen, really. And that's kind of by design. And yet, Zen is, this thousands-year-old tradition. And so somebody somewhere has had to talk about it, has had to convey it from one mind to another, and the only thing we have to do that with is words. And so the tradition of Zen is to pass these ideas along in little short stories they call koans. And so I've got one here, for example. But as we go through it, I just want you to pay attention to how you're reacting to this story. We're going to talk about it in a second. Whenever anyone asked him about Zen, the great master Gutai would quietly raise one finger into the air. A boy in the village began to imitate this behavior. When he heard people talking about Gotai's teachings, he would interrupt the discussion and raise his finger. Gotai heard about the boy's mischief. When he saw him in the street, he seized him and cut off his finger. The boy cried and began to run off, but Gotai called out to him. When the boy turned to look, Gotai raised his finger into the air. At that moment, the boy became enlightened. What? Okay, so there's this old dude who is like this, wise Zen master. So he's the good guy in the story, right? And he goes after this kid and cuts his finger off. Violence, it's not even like another monk or somebody who's committed his life to this. He goes and mutilates this kid for life, right? And then makes fun of the fact that he's mutilated him. And then the kid becomes enlightened and everybody's happy. What? Okay, so as I'm working through that story with my blunt Western mind, I'm trying to figure it out, right? Are you guys doing the same thing? You're trying to find the lesson. It's like a parable. It's like from the Bible. It's like there's a hidden metaphor in here that's going to unlock the goodness in me, and I will become enlightened. Stop. That struggle that you're going through to find the lesson in this horrible thing, that's kind of Zen. That the struggle itself, there is no answer. It's not a riddle. That's what we want to do. We want to solve it. But it's that cockeyed state that you're in before you solve it that is the point. It's also super apropos that the website I got this text from was called Thank You, You Zen Asshole. So Zen is this cross-eyed void of reason that we fall into, usually when something unexpected happens. And you might also recognize this feeling from your experience developing software. Who here writes code? Okay. You know this feeling. And this is not terribly surprising once you realize that Zen, while commonly being mistaken for a religion, is actually a psychological practice. And software development, while commonly being mistaken for an engineering discipline, is also a psychological practice. We can't even decide amongst ourselves what the right noun is. Are we engineers? Are we developers? Is it a hard, predictable, repeatable process where we have rigor and science? Or is it this kind of thing that happens? We can't agree on it. And when two good people argue, they're both right. There's two sides to this. And because you can say all day, I'm a software engineer, I apply empiricism, rigor, and science to my work, and it's just, it either is 0 or it is 1. But you have to admit that that process involves sometimes just that your code doesn't work. I was on a team recently, we were building a React app. And the proposed win-win architecture for authentication was to not build our own authentication, our own login, but instead to hook into an OAuth provider, in this case, Azure Active Directory B2C, which is Azure AD B2C, as if we didn't have long enough acronyms already. And so we said that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. And they were going to set up our client company was going to set up their B2C instance and have all these other apps authenticate through the same thing, so nobody had to build any login screens ever, and it was really a great idea. And then when it came time for the team to actually get down and wire things in, of course we start with a search on the internet for React and Azure AD B2C, and of course there was an NPM package named React Azure AD B2C. Thank you, NPM. And we pulled it right in. Said, we're going to be done by the end of the afternoon. Pause for dramatic effect. So we wired the thing in, we got all the tokens lined up and put in the config file and set it up and fired it up, and well, it didn't quite, it sort of worked, and then it didn't redirect us back to the app, right? Okay, no big deal. We'll just, we got in a little chat with the dude setting up the OAuth server, and kept working at it, made sure all the tokens were right, made sure everything got the mirrors all lined up correctly, and it still didn't go. We'll get this fixed in the morning, no problem, guys. So, we keep at it, we keep trying new things, we go deeper and deeper into Chrome DevTools and look at responses and requests and all the little header values and everything, and 5 days later, we're still banging our heads on the table, and this thing isn't working. It's not redirecting correctly. There's no page in the docs for this. There's no answer on Stack Overflow that's going to address this situation. By the way, we had read all of them. We were doing that Stack Overflow deja vu thing, where you've seen that answer already, but you keep Googling. There's no next thing to try. We had all the brains on the team on this problem at once. And every one of them was stuck. But it's software, right? This is computers. At some point, there was, in fact, a 0 that should have been a 1, or some such hard evidential problem. But at this moment, for our team, for this project, for this product, for this software. The problem was not in the computer. I'm going to read you a passage from chapter 24. A screw sticks, for example, on a side cover assembly. You check the manual to see if there might be any special cause for the screw to come off so hard, but all it says is, remove side cover plate, in that wonderful terse technical style that never tells you what you want to know. There's no earlier procedure left undone that might cause the cover screws to stick. Your mind was already thinking ahead to what you would do once the cover plate was off. And so it takes a little time to realize that this irritating minor annoyance of a torn screw slot isn't just an irritating and minor annoyance. You're stuck, stopped, terminated. It's absolutely stopped you from fixing the motorcycle. This isn't a rare scene in science or technology. This is the most common scene of all. Just plain stuck. In traditional maintenance, this is the worst of all moments, so bad that you have even avoided thinking about it before you come to it. This is the zero moment of consciousness. Stuck. No answer. Honked. Kaput. It's a miserable experience emotion. You're losing time. You're incompetent. You don't know what you're doing. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should take the machine to a real mechanic who knows how to figure these things out. Can I have a show of hands, please? Who has never felt like this? No hands. Who's only felt like this once? Right. Okay. So we have the sense of deep professional shame, incompetence, and loneliness. We're ashamed, incompetent, and lonely, just like everybody else. Why does this happen? Why does our work betray us like this? Why can't we just keep typing the next line of code? Like I said, I've tried to tell a story about these kind of moments as they relate to software development in the past. I used to talk about knowledge work versus manual work. In that manual work, of course, is sort of like folding laundry or doing the dishes or bolting a car onto bolting a door onto a car in a factory line. You know, it's predictable, it's repetitive, you know what's coming next, and it's linear in nature. The more people you add to the job, the more value you can produce. Knowledge work, on the other hand, is inherently, because it's innovation, you're doing something that hasn't been done before. You have an inherent uncertainty in it, and it's nonlinear in nature. And so there's that trial and error, that kind of dip in there, accounts for these weird moments where we're stopping and starting, getting stuck and unstuck. And how things are not linear, no matter how much management and measurement wants them to be. And this is useful, in having that broad conversation. But when I read this part of the book in particular, he wasn't using knowledge work as an example. Working on your bike, I imagine that's pretty manual work. And he still was able to describe that feeling of just being completely lost and stuck using physical objects, manual work. He wasn't innovating, he was fixing his bike by the numbers. So maybe it's not a property of the work that gets us stuck, but a property of our thinking. Pirsig goes on to give us a different model for thinking about this. In my mind now is an image of a huge long railroad train One of those 120 boxcar jobs that cross the prairies all the time with lumber and vegetables going east, and with automobiles and other manufactured goods going west. I want to call this railroad train knowledge and subdivide it into two parts: classic knowledge and romantic knowledge. In terms of the analogy, classic knowledge is the engine and all the boxcars. All of them and everything that's in them. If you subdivide the train into parts, you will find no romantic knowledge anywhere. And unless you're careful, it's easy to make the presumption that that's all the train there is. This isn't because romantic knowledge is non-existent, or even because it's unimportant. It's just that so far the definition of the train is static and purposeless. This was what I was trying to get at back in South Dakota when I talked about two whole dimensions of existence. It's two whole ways of looking at the train. Romantic quality, in terms of the analogy, isn't any part of the train. It's the leading edge of the engine. A two-dimensional surface of no real significance unless you understand that the train isn't a static entity at all. A train really isn't a train if it can't go anywhere. In terms of, in the process of examining the train and subdividing it into parts, we've inadvertently stopped it so that it isn't really a train we're examining. That's why we get stuck. The real train of knowledge isn't a static entity that can be stopped and subdivided. It's always going somewhere on a track called quality. And that engine and all those 120 boxcars are never going anywhere except where the track of quality takes them. And romantic quality, the leading edge of the engine, takes them along that track. Romantic reality is the cutting edge of experience. It's the leading edge of the train of knowledge that keeps the whole train on the track. Traditional knowledge is only the collective memory of where that leading edge has been. At the leading edge, there are no subjects, no objects, only the track of quality ahead. And if you have no formal way of evaluating, no way of acknowledging this quality, then the entire train has no way of knowing where to go. You don't have pure reason. You have pure confusion. The leading edge is where absolutely all of the action is. The leading edge contains all the infinite possibilities of the future. It contains the history of the past. Where else could they be contained? So we've got this, I think, in Western culture, we've got this idea of classic down, right? What's the way to solve a big problem? Break it down into small pieces, take it apart. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Super useful. But now we've got this new idea from maybe more Eastern traditions of thought, this romantic quality that Pirsig introduces. When we as an industry get a hold of a new idea, we get really excited about it. We build conferences around it. We say the old idea is trash. We replace the old idea with the new idea. It used to be waterfall conferences, I imagine, right? But Agile's the new way to do things. So we throw SDLC out the window and show up for Kanban and Scrum and manifestos and values and all those wonderful things. We say we don't do web forms anymore. We do MVC. We don't do Java anymore. We do Python. That last one was a poor example. We have lots of different tools, but we tend to supplant old ideas with new ideas. And I want to kind of call out that we shouldn't do this with romantic and classic thinking. We don't want to replace classic with romantic. But we need to acknowledge that we have skipped leg day. We do not think like this nearly as much as we think like this. It's out of balance. So in practice of thinking like that, I want to walk through another example of a romantic versus a classic view of something that we all deal with. Time. He alluded to it at the end of the passage that I read to you. But have you guys seen this Twitter account? Super useful. Also, this slide is old. I didn't update it. We're further along than 26%. But the point is, you regularly get a progress bar in their tweet that shows you how complete the year is. This is a classical view of time, right? Because you've got this idea of completeness. We're not done yet. We're not there on this imaginary construct that we all live by. We're not done with the calendar year. That part, the green part over there, that is the past. That is the portion of time that has already gone by. The black part is the future. That's yet to come. And you are here. This tiny little sliver that doesn't even have any thickness to it. Seems pretty solid to me. We're here, right? This is useful for dividing up time and making plans and recalling how things went in the past, right? It's useful. But it's not as real as like this. This is like a romantic view of time. Color-coded the same so you can make the connections here. That's the past, that's the future, and they're these kind of amorphous blobs. And where are they? This whole slide is now. The whole slide is the present, as opposed to that little non-existent sliver. The future and the past are always here in the present. The present is the container for these things, because our experience, the front edge of the trait on the past, is a memory, or a regret, or evidence that something was done before. There's a building, there's a roof over our heads. Somebody in the past built that. We're experiencing it now as a roof. Here. The future shows up as a plan, an anxiety. Looking ahead on the calendar. You're doing it now. You never tasted something yesterday. Never in your life have you experienced something when it wasn't the present. All you're carrying with it are these notions of it, and you're experiencing them again now. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever will happen. Everything is happening. That's the romantic view of time. Again, not meant to replace the classic view of time as a linear progression, where now is virtually nothing, this moment where time is flowing through the present, becoming the future, becoming the past. But we need to augment our view of things in the classical with twisting them like 90 degrees and saying, okay, what's the romantic look at this? So this sits in our experience along with our other five senses. Yes, there are six senses. Your sixth sense is thought. You don't make thoughts. You're not a factory that produces thoughts. You've got a sensory organ that detects them. And this whole business of the past and the future is just a subset of what your thoughts are, that you're sensing. This is our experience from cradle to grave. This is all we get. And I promise that this has anything to do with software development and being stuck. So let me get us back there by, of course, going to the book that's not about software. Let's get back to that script. Let's consider a reevaluation of the situation in which we assume that the stuckness now occurring, the zero of consciousness, isn't the worst of all possible situations, but the best possible situation you could be in. After all, it's exactly this stuckness that Zen Buddhists go to so much trouble to induce through koans, deep breathing, sitting still, and the like. Your mind is empty. You have a hollow, flexible attitude of beginner's mind. You're right at the front edge of the train of knowledge, at the track of reality itself. Consider for a change that this is a moment not to be feared, but to be cultivated. If your mind is truly profoundly stuck, then you may be much better off than when it was loaded with ideas. The solution to the problem often at first seems unimportant or undesirable, but the state of stuckness allows it in time to assume its true importance. It seemed small because your previous rigid evaluation, which led to the stuckness, made it small. The fear of stuckness is needless, because the longer you stay stuck, the more you see the quality reality that gets you unstuck every time. What's really been getting you stuck is the running from the stuckness through the cars of your train of knowledge, looking for a solution that is out in front of the train. Stuckness shouldn't be avoided. It's the psychic predecessor of all real understanding. An egoless acceptance of stuckness is the key to an understanding of all quality in mechanical work as in other endeavors. Normally, screws are so cheap and small and simple that you think of them as unimportant. But right now, as your quality awareness becomes stronger, your romantic awareness, you realize that this one, individual particular screw, is neither cheap nor small nor unimportant. Right now, this screw is worth exactly the selling price of the whole motorcycle. Because the motorcycle is actually valueless until you get the screw out. With this reevaluation of the screw comes a willingness to expand your knowledge up. When we're stuck, what's our posture tend to be? Why did it take us 5 days to stop Googling? When we're stuck, we want to avoid that feeling. We don't want to acknowledge it. We want to turn away from it. We want to push through it. We've got to have gumption and stick-to-itiveness and grit and all those things. But this denial of where we are takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of emotional energy. It takes a lot of mental energy. And it distracts you. We're so distracted and dismayed by the fact that the evidence in front of us doesn't match the classical model of what we had in our minds of what should be. Should may be the most harmful word in all of software development. It implies that what is isn't, or isn't right. That this is right and not this. Whenever I come across this in documentation, requirements, acceptance criteria, I come across a should, I do whatever I can to change it to a nice crisp is. Because it either is or isn't. Should comes with baggage. It comes with failure, inadequacy, hiding, anger, depression, and just a morass of unhelpful, unskillful emotions, none of which get you unstuck. So Fazzaro, I'm sitting through your talk and I want to know how to get unstuck. Are you going to tell us? Okay, all right. How about now? Are you stuck now? You might be. Who's stuck now? All right. It happens. But for the majority of you who are not currently stuck, how'd you do it? How'd you get unstuck? At some point, you got unstuck. Does that make you an expert now? should you be up here telling us how to get unstuck? Have you finally gotten unstuck for the last time? These are all ridiculous questions. And it kind of points to the fact that we feel ourselves flailing throughout our career in software. We're flailing between feeling like we don't belong here. Like, there's no way I should be getting paid for this. I'm incompetent. I'm ashamed of myself. And I am a god. My code has compiled and the tests are green. Get out of my way. I know this one. Stuck, unstuck, veering back and forth. That crossing that line at such extremes that we do throughout our career is what causes all the suffering of being stuck. This is what hurts. So how do we walk up the line a little more gingerly, right? Because this gets worse the further into your career you get. You start off, you feel incompetent, you feel overwhelmed by everybody, but at least you've got that maybe somewhat abusive title of junior software developer to go with it. You're like, okay, yeah, this sucks, but I'm supposed to not know this. And then you learn the first thing, that you're good at, and you swing over here, and then you do some of that. But then the further you get in, you become senior software developer, you become architect. I should be a god. I should do this all the time. I should do that way. When you get stuck, it's even worse because you really ought to be never stuck again if you're an architect, right? If you're that far along in your career, it's even worse because you're up on a higher pedestal. So what do we do? What can we do to walk that middle way? Because this stuff is gonna happen. If I was the kind of Zen asshole who referenced Fight Club twice in the same talk, I would, at this point, describe to you this idea of me being, I'm in Tyler Durden's Durdenmobile, and he's just stepped on the gas and locked all the doors, and he's screaming at me, demanding that I give this talk in 30 seconds before I die. 30 seconds. I'm freaking out. How the hell am I going to do that? I can do it in 3. Getting stuck is the job. Thank you. I do a little curtsy. So this is the whole thing, right? Good, nobody's walking out. Okay. What we have to do when we find ourselves stuck is embrace it. My first draft of this slide was the word accept. But embrace, I want to go bigger than accepting. We have to do more than just accept that we're stuck. That's like the front door on getting unstuck. By embracing it, we've not only accepted it, but we have leaned into it. I want you to not just say, I'm stuck. Oh well. I want you to go, shit, yes, I'm stuck. This is awesome. Lean into it and cultivate that. Ken Beck, in Extreme Programming Explained, he said, software is a game of insight. And insight is not only what gets us unstuck, but stuckness is the necessary prerequisite to insight. So that's why I want you to lean in. That's why I want you to get pumped. When you get stuck, it means the check is in the mail. It means that insight is coming. It's going to happen. And in 2014, the writer Jessica Stillman laid out these 4 stages of creativity. I think this applies here. Preparation, incubation, illumination, and validation. Incubation is highlighted because that's basically stuckness, right? You prepare. You get all the information in your head about the problem. You read the user story. You look through the code. You plan out an architectural approach. You start to write the code. You're chugging along. You got a little bit of a feedback loop going. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't work. Stuck. Now what? Okay, well, go take a lap. Now you are being forced to stop by just the nature of the way your brain works. You've run out of ideas, and something in here says, something in the system of knowledge work says, okay, breaks. It's time to digest this on a deeper level. That's what stuckness is. It's not something going wrong, it's part of the process. We incubate, and then, bam, insight. We have a new idea after taking some time away from it. And then we get to test that idea. And then we're back into preparation. We're going around and around. So Western thinking, classical thinking, wants to look at this and see a to-do list. All right? Well, first I gotta get in the office, get my coffee, sit down at the desk, prepare, gotta prepare. And then I'm gonna incubate, check, and then I'm gonna illuminate. And then your manager comes by and says, well, we need that thing faster. Can we skip this part? Skip the incubation? Of course not. Classical thinking, we're taking the thing to pieces, imagining that it isn't just like this. This is not a to-do list, this is a map. This is here to show you where you are when you feel completely disoriented and boggled and lost. This is just a map. It's gonna happen anyway. And our problem isn't getting stuck. It's our posture when we are stuck. So I've got a couple of tips to improve your posture for when you find yourself at that point on the map. And there's kind of an overarching theme to all of them. So I'm going to point that one out first. What's up, guys? I'm back. Peekaboo. You heard me. You saw me do that. I feel a little silly. Grown-ass man playing peekaboo. But peekaboo is everything. We breathe in, we breathe out. We get up in the morning, we go to sleep at night. Sun comes up, sun goes down. We go to work, we go home. We write code, we stop writing code. There's ones and zeros at the base level of what we're doing, either on or off. Our code works, our code stops working. Everything is peekaboo. It's going to switch on and off. This is just what this whole thing does. And you're going to have a bad time if you try to hold it still. You try to grab it and keep it on one side or the other. It's just not the way things work. The way to walk that middle line is just to play along. Play peekaboo along with the thing that's playing peekaboo. Like classical versus romantic thinking. Oscillate between the two. If you overdo one and underdo the other, you're going to have a bad time. If you take 3 breaths in for every 1 breath you breathe out, your chest is going to feel like it's going to explode. And you're going to be sitting there wondering why. Why can't I just keep breathing in? Oxygen is good, right? So here's what playing peekaboo looks like for nerds. Oscillate between your front brain and your back brain. This is my kindergarten way of saying conscious mind and unconscious mind. The conscious mind deals in classic thinking. Linear thought. One idea at a time, one foot in front of the other. Break it down into pieces. Preparing. Writing code that works. Your unconscious mind, however, is the one that does the romantic thinking. And this may be why it's been neglected. It's because we have this model, this mental model of ourselves being in control, being in the driver's seat. And so we're always over here trying to push on the gas. But you don't get the benefits of romantic thinking, unconscious thought, where you make connections and think about things in parallel and not in a linear fashion. You make innovation here. And in order to tap into this part of your brain, you don't just go, okay, I'm going to do some back brain thinking now. I'm going to use my unconscious. You have to let go with this, because this does itself. Unhand that problem. Take a lap. Go get a coffee. Take a walk. Have a conversation about something completely different. Don't check your email. I mean, do something actually away from your machine. That's what's going to engage the back brain. This is what the traditional Western view of that is. This guy's a chump. He's going to get fired. Right? But he's about to have some insight. She knows it. She's checking it out. So what about when the boss is watching though? Like, this is easy in theory to say, oh yeah, let's look at this old-timey drawing and look how stupid they were. But would you like pop back from your desk and open a book in front of your boss? Maybe. Maybe that would give you like little funny butterflies in your stomach, because that feels like not working. But it might be the best work you could be doing at that moment. Here's another one. Repairable versus postverbal coding. And kind of by this, I mean coding by yourself versus pair programming or mob programming with other people. They're both valuable. They're both important. Pre-verbal, you can go deep, and by not expending energy translating your thoughts into words, which are different things than thoughts. By not putting your energy into translating your thoughts into words, you might have an insight or an idea that moves you forward on what you need to do. On the other hand, there's tremendous value in putting the brakes on your thoughts and squeezing them into one-dimensional stream of words that can get into another human being's brain, because then you're going to tap into their verbal skills and their thoughts and their ideas and add it to the problem space. And maybe that's what generates the insight. To do one only of these and not the other is going to get you stuck. Dancing back and forth on a regular basis is going to be something that gets you unstuck. I've had tremendously good experience with teams that, for example, mob together in the afternoon, but everybody's on their own at their own desk, solo in the mornings. So just lunchtime is that natural cutover point. We go get a room, we mob up, and then, anything you might have been lost on in the morning becomes resolved by the team. Anything the team has done in the afternoon, maybe some details get cleaned up in the morning. It's like breathing. And finally, oscillate healthily between work and rest. That paycheck that you get, hopefully, that paycheck that you get from your employer, what's that for? We usually think it's for our time, but it's really, if you're a knowledge worker, it's for your attention. It's for your quality of attention on a problem that your boss has, that your employer has. So, with that in mind, if you are working 60-hour weeks, if you're burning weekends and then coming into the office anyway and just like going at it, you are not being productive. You are ripping off the person who is paying your salary. You are shortchanging them on the quality of the attention that you can give to their problem. Go home at 5. Stop working. Be with your family. Be into your own activities. Do something that is not what you do for work. Come back to it. This is, you might already know this, but it's kind of painful to put down a software problem that you're really engaged in. Because your brain wants to keep going. Let it, just stop. Just, you walk away. Your brain can keep spinning. But take that time take those boundaries seriously, because the quality of what you do from 8 to 5 or whatever your work hours are will improve dramatically when you're getting good sleep and you're walking away from that work on a regular basis. If, excuse me, I'm not a Buddhist, but it would be an understatement for me to say that I think the Buddha was onto something. The very first step in his Noble Eightfold Path is right view. Before you can do any of this, before you can relieve any suffering in your life, you have to see things as they are. You have to clear out your notions of what things should be and have the right view. All right, if he was a modern millennial with a blog on Medium, he'd probably refer to this as right mental model, because that's more sciencey. And the point being that there isn't, this would be like the hook in the blog post. It would be like, there is no one right mental model, because everybody's clicking through like, what's the right mental model? There isn't one. The only thing you have to do to have the right mental model is to continuously throw away your mental model. Continually refresh it with what the evidence tells you right in front of your face. The world is ever changing. Ever playing Peekaboo with you. And we have to be agile enough to rise up and meet it. And be ready to throw away that mental model that's keeping us stuck. And if you dance along and play Peekaboo with everything in front of you, that should be enough to get you unstuck from just about anything. Thank you. How am I doing on time?
Right there.
Okay, right there. Any questions? Thoughts? What did that bring up for you?
I really don't understand what you mean by peekaboo.
Peekaboo, just the oscillation between two opposite states. So, I was here, and then I was behind the thing, and then I came out, and just like all the examples that I gave, I guess can you give me an example of? I feel like I explained it. I guess I did.
It's like yin and yang. It's like
opposites.
Light or dark. So you're doing something you're not doing.
Yeah, and so the peekaboo pattern comes from all the switching back and forth that I was recommending in terms of paying attention to a problem and then walking away, or working and then resting, for example. Yes.
So, any advice on how to deal with kind of pushback from your employer with getting this sort of model of thinking about things, like I really need to take more of a mental break from something, or give it time, or focus on something else, when there is a time frame attached to this project, and you do need to do X, Y, Z this way. I mean, you don't want to get fired or feel like your employer doesn't think that you're going about it how they want you to, but in order to be the most productive for you, maybe this is how you need to do it, but that's not how it's adopted where you work.
To me, it sounds like it's sort of a question of how you're being measured. Are you being evaluated by the time you've spent with your fingers on the keyboard, or by the actual outcome of the thing you're supposed to be solving? So I wonder if that's a conversation, depending on your environment, is that a conversation you can have with, hey, look, here's my track record of solving things, even though I took, an hour or two away from my keyboard at the time. Hopefully that's a conversation you can have.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, because I work in a company that's very much front brain,
Okay.
and back brain is like, why are you wasting time? So what kind of approaches can you try to, encourage the culture to think before they lead?
A really important thing to do in all of this is to experiment and model the behavior yourself first. So you're not going to go out and change your company, but you can, like I said, for example, turn on your screensaver and sit back from your desk a little bit and you exhibit or take a walk, be seen walking away from the problem and coming back to it. And hopefully, then you will establish, first of all, you experiment with what balance between the two things that you need, that you arrive at, because everybody's different, every team is different. But you figure it out, you model that behavior, and then you kind of advocate for it, especially if you're in a position where somebody comes to you and they're stuck, then you can advocate for that through direct experience, and that's the sort of thing that spreads. You gotta be patient. It's gonna take a while. All right. Yes, one more.
So you mentioned at the beginning of your speech about the problem that your team has. Did they resolve it?
Yes, we fixed it. We are unstuck. The GitHub repository had a newer version of the code than the NPM package. The screw was so small and insignificant, we didn't even notice it until we noticed it. We expanded our knowledge of the problem. Yes?
Real quickly, what was the title of the book, the author that you were reading from?
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. All right, thanks guys.